Thank you for tuning in to Four Quarters with the Denver Broncos. I'm Alexis Perry. Unlike last season, Training Camp 2020 has just flown by. We're 2 weeks into Broncos camp and exactly 1 week away from the roster cut deadline. By Saturday, September 5th at 2 p.m. Mountain Time, the Broncos' current 80-man roster will have to be whittled down to 53. Without preseason games, practice is the only opportunity players will have to prove that they have a strong grasp of the playbook and can compete at the level expected of a Denver Bronco. I caught up with James Palmer from the NFL Network to get his thoughts on which bubble players might make this roster and learn which veterans have stepped up their game. James, camp is down the stretch and other teams are trying to gather as much information about the Denver Broncos as humanly possible. So what have you heard from other teams? What are their impressions of the Broncos right now?
Yeah, Alexis, this is an offseason unlike any we've ever seen, right? Everybody's trying to get a gauge about what other teams are doing, who's making plays on other teams. Teams are actually following beat reporters, I'm told, in different cities to get a gauge because, remember, they don't have preseason games to go out and look at the film of guys from other teams. And teams are also trying to hide their players a little bit, and that's why they're very quiet about guys maybe near the bubble that they like to sneak on that expanded practice squad. But as I talked to multiple teams, a couple of things have jumped out. Number one is Jerry Jeudy. And teams that are even within the division have said, we are starting to get things together about how we are going to defend him. They're watching film already on how they're going to go against Jerry Jeudy. They expect him to make an impact right off the bat. They knew he was a polished route runner, but at the same time, they wanted to be able to go and see if he was going to develop. And they're hearing good things, so they're doing extra studying. As I talk to other teams and just ask them, what's your general take on the Broncos? Two things kind of come up. One, I have some concerns if I was running the team about the tackle spot. I'm curious with, Juwan James opting out, where they stand at the tackle spot. And then also the corner depth is a concern with some people around the league. But another name on that side is A.J. Bouye. And he has played well, and he has played well through camp. And there was always a thought in Vic Fangio's mind that I know what I want out of this guy, right? I've wanted him before. I know what I think his talents could do in my system. And now we're starting to see that through camp, that he's starting to shine as that number one corner.
Okay, there are no preseason games. We know that. And there are only 14 padded practices. How important are those padded practices, especially for guys who are on the cusp of trying to make an impression?
It's massive. Every single rep matters. And in this particular facet of the game, special teams matters immensely. You talk to coaches across the league and they'll tell you, the lack of preseason games is where I cannot evaluate special teams the way I would like to. Teams are going live in special teams more than they ever have in the past because they have to be able to evaluate those guys, because if you can't play special teams, you're probably not, and you're not a starter, you're probably not going to be making the roster. If you can dominate special teams, it helps your cause tremendously. So that is one aspect with these padded practices, and the lack of preseason games is so important. A couple of guys that have really helped their cause, Draymond Jones, I'm told, has had a really good camp on that defensive line, the Ohio State University. So obviously there's success tied there. But at the same time, on the other side of the ball, Jake Butt is a big name that I keep hearing, and he keeps making flashes throughout camp. And is there a better story to follow than Jake Butt with the multiple ACLs, the multiple knee surgeries? And it's just icing on the cake the way he is playing, because Vic Fangio is just like every other coach, Alexis, that wants that type of character guy in their locker room. Guys, they look at somebody like that, and they know what they've been through, and they know how they've persevered through it. It helps the culture of your room. It's even better that he's actually playing pretty well right now, making things difficult on a tight end group.
Well, we know the guard position is one of the strongest for the Denver Broncos with Dalton Reisner and Graham Glasgow. But what about the guy in the middle, Lloyd Cushenberry? It looks like he might be pulling away with that starting role.
Yeah, a lot of people like to evaluate reps, Alexis, every single day. Who's going with who? How are the reps getting divvied up? It's better to do that towards the end of training camp than during the beginning, because when new guys come in, they get eased in sometimes. And I think if you look at the reps he's getting now, you're starting to get a sense of where things are. They loved the way he was mentally, I was told, before training camp started. They thought in the classroom he picked up everything. He was extremely bright. He was figuring everything they needed him to do in terms of calls and whatnot on the offensive line. They wanted to see if it translated to the field. It is starting to do that, and you're starting to see the questions get answered. Obviously, like you mentioned, he has great guards next to him that are going to improve his play and make life a little bit easier on him. But the way he works and the way his mind works specifically, well, he's been doing that work himself to put himself in a very good spot to be the starting center.
Well, earlier today was the Broncos' first practice at the stadium. Just how important are those stadium practices, especially for a young team like the Broncos?
They're really, really important. And the teams that value them year in and year out, not just a year where you don't have preseason games, they do believe that they have an advantage. The Patriots do it regularly. You know, the Broncos have done it regularly in the past. And what you get out of it are a lot of the little things. Specifically, the Broncos are very young. No preseason games. You're going to have rookies making an impact right away. What teams have tried to do, particularly this offseason, is make sure the lights aren't too bright for these guys when that first week one rolls around. So what do? You get them out on that field. You get Jerry Jeudy catching passes in the end zone. You start to get a feeling for what it feels like to play on that surface, the dimensions around the outside of the field. Tom Brady was going through that with us down here in Tampa about how you start to know the sunlight. That's for Drew Lock and certain routes when it's a different time of day, you'll know where the sun is in that stadium. What are the reflections? All the different feel of a place where you don't spend a whole lot of time. Those days are extremely important to get in there and try to get some sort of simulation. So when week one rolls around, there's a lot more comfortable players out there, and that's what the Broncos are trying to do.
Well, speaking of player comfortability, it looks like quarterback Drew Lock is pretty comfortable as the starter this year.
He really is, and he walked into the building knowing that, right? There was no move or even thought for a guy like Jameis Winston or Cam Newton. It was his group, his locker room to operate and run and be in charge of from day one, and that obviously gives him confidence. He already is a very confident player, but I think what we're seeing through camp as well is we're starting to see him play with a little bit more of that swagger that we've really liked in those 5 starts, right? He said he had to hold himself back a little bit last year with Joe Flacco being there. I think you're seeing him be himself, and I'm hearing from people in the building saying we're getting a chance to have him go out there and make plays. And in my opinion, I think they're going to utilize those instincts. They're going to utilize his ability, as a basketball player, to go out and make plays. And I think maybe he'll have a little bit more liberty to go out and make some plays. Obviously, he's still learning Pat Shurmur's system, and he has a lot to learn within that. He'd be obviously one to tell you that. But I think they're going to let him go out and make some plays, and I think that's the fun part of him and the fun part of this offense.
Well, coming up after the break, Matt Boyer is joined by Broncos Hall of Fame safety Steve Atwater to get his reaction to the first 2 weeks of Broncos camp. Welcome back to 4 Quarters with the Denver Broncos. Hall of Famer Steve Atwater has had a bird's eye view of every practice throughout camp so far, and he's even had the opportunity to watch practice with a wide variety of Broncos alumni, such as Peyton Manning. Matt Boyer is standing by with Steve Atwater to relive some of his favorite moments from the past couple of weeks of Broncos camp.
Thank you, Alexis. We've traded 27 Hall of Fame Plaza for Ring of Fame Plaza, Steve. There's old number 27 right there. How's it look?
Oh, man, it's beautiful as ever. Between 2 superstars, Terrell Davis and Gary Zimmerman, they get much better than that.
Let's talk big picture training camp, and I want to start with a guy who's probably going to end up in Ring of Fame Plaza, and that's Von Miller. It seems like Von's come to training camp with a renewed energy, renewed inspiration. What have you seen from him so far?
Yeah, well, Von's not only going to be in the Ring of Fame, first
Gold
ballot
jacket?
Hall of
Okay.
Fame in my opinion, but yeah, I've seen definitely Von have a little bit of change of heart in terms of reflecting on how good he can be. And he's come out, he's worked extremely hard. His leadership, I think, is at another level right now. And I think Von has got a great year ahead of him. And he was inspired by, the death of Kobe Bryant and just looking at all the different videos and all the amazing things that people were saying about how he took charge and how he kind of took that leadership role and really embraced it. And Von is looking to be a better leader this year in addition to being an amazing player. And he was also inspired by The Last Dance with Michael Jordan.
Came in incredible shape, said he's been in the best shape of his life this year. He's making life tough for Drew Lock in the offense during practice. We've seen a couple of times he has the ability to wreck a practice. When you think about Lock and the way he's been able to kind of endure that pressure, what have you seen from him? Has he been consistent?
I think he has. Now, up to yesterday, he's been extremely consistent. Yesterday's practice, I would say, probably wasn't an A practice. Probably was a C practice yesterday for the offense overall. But Drew Lock has been doing a really amazing job of, knowing the offense, first of all, knowing where his receivers are going to be, and then putting the ball on the money. And that's the most amazing thing, that he can be on the run and throw such accurate passes. I think Broncos country is in for a treat.
Has he taken advantage of the weapons? Because you think about it, Jerry Jeudy, KJ Hamler. Hamler's been hurt, but Noah Fant, Albert O. I mean, has he taken advantage of this massive collection of weapons?
Yeah, he absolutely has, and he knows what a treat it is to have so many weapons. Jerry Jeudy, Cortland Sutton, Noah Fant, Nick Vannett, Albert O, Melvin Gordon, Philip Lindsay.
Those are some names right there.
Man, those are some serious names, guys who in themselves could be superstars on any team, but to have them all put together on one team, I think we're very fortunate.
What do you think about sleepers? Let's talk about the guys that Broncos country might not be thinking about as much. Guys like Levante Bellamy, we heard from head coach Vic Fangio, McTelvin Ajim, another guy on the defensive side of the ball expected to make an impact. Who have you seen that you like?
I've liked those guys. I've liked Levante Bellamy. And watching this film from Western Michigan, the guy has a nose for the end zone. And, you know, all he needs is a little bit of space. He's kind of like Philip Lindsay in that regard. He needs a little bit of space. He can take it the distance. And once he gets in the secondary, he's extremely difficult to catch. And my guy, McTelvin Ajim, go home!
There it is. There it is. I knew it was coming.
Hey, I gave you a shout out yesterday for your Michigan guy. It was Jake Butt, so there we go. McTelvin Ajim, he's been stout in the middle. That's one of my phrases I love for defensive linemen. He's got great hustle to the ball, and I think the coaches really like what he brings as a defensive player. And then also Bryce Callahan. A lot of people, you know, were expecting him to be injured, wasn't expecting him to play up to par. He's been healthy. He's been making plays all over the field. Don't sleep on Bryce Callahan.
I like it. And your guy Albert O. I know you've been talking about Albert O. all camp, the size, the speed. You like the Missouri Tiger.
I liked Albert O back when Drew Lock was there, and again, I thought he was going to be a first-round draft pick. So us being able to draft him in the 4th round, and he's shown his talent, his abilities, and also that he and Drew Lock are on the same page, and he's picked up this offense. It's pretty impressive. This guy's going to make a lot of plays for the Broncos.
A little bit more than 2 weeks away from football. Steve, you ready for some regular season football?
Man, I've been ready, man. It's time. I think Colorado is ready. Broncos country is ready. Let's do it.
The Hall of Famer is ready. That'll do it for us from Ring of Fame Plaza. Steve, appreciate your time.
Thank you, Matt.
Still to come on 4 Quarters with the Denver Broncos, I'll be joined by Dave Logan to learn which players have impressed him during a training camp unlike any we've ever seen before. Welcome back to 4 Quarters with the Denver Broncos. I'm Alexis Perry, and I am thrilled to be joined now by legendary voice of your Denver Broncos on KOA Radio, Dave Logan. Dave, we're a couple weeks into Broncos training camp, and already the injury bug has really bitten this team. We've seen Justin Strnad go out for the season, Todd Davis carted off with a calf injury, and there have been a plethora of soft tissue injuries. How do you think the entirely virtual offseason played a role in the injuries we've seen so far?
Well, I mean, we'll never completely know, right? But I think anytime you take a professional athlete and you change the routine that they're used to, that coaches are used to, you know, we're all creatures of habit, and never more so than when you play in the NFL or coach in the NFL. So, I mean, these guys have had personal trainers, and they were able to work out in January and February. But when you miss OTAs and you miss the off-season conditioning for the most part, and then you try to come back and ramp things up at the usual pace that you need to in training camp, it just stands to reason that you're going to have some soft tissue issues. And KJ Hamler, the 2nd-round draft choice, he's got a hamstring injury. And so we're seeing, I think based on the last 4 or 5 years, we're seeing an uncommon amount of soft tissue issue early in this Broncos camp.
Well, one guy who missed almost all of Broncos camp last year was quarterback Drew Lock. Last year, he was the backup. This year, he is the guy. What are some of the biggest improvements you've seen in Drew Lock's game so far?
Well, you can tell that he has immersed himself in the playbook in the offseason, right? He's a guy that, you know, you look at him, especially in practice, and it looks like he has command of the huddle. It's a new offense. I mean, for the most part, some of the concepts, the passing concepts, will be different with Pat Shurmur, the new offensive coordinator. The running game, I would guess, will have a lot of components that they had last year with Mike Munchak still here as the offensive line coach. But I think anytime that you're the guy, there's just a different feeling. Whether you're the starting quarterback or, you know, you're a backup receiver that now is the starting wide receiver, when you're in the huddle with that first team, it's just a different feel. And so you quickly, I think, come to the realization that the expectations are much different. So I'm anxious to see what Drew can do. I think he's going to have a very, very good season. But I think from an offensive standpoint, for Broncos fans that are expecting this offense to come out against Tennessee and hit on all cylinders, to me, I mean, the defense is built for right now for playing really good football from week 1 to week 16. The offense, a new coordinator, and a lot of new faces. I think it's going to take them some time, and we might be 3 or 4 games into the season before we really can identify what the personality of this offense will be in 2020.
Well, the last time I had the opportunity to catch up with you was literally just minutes after Jerry Jeudy was drafted by the Denver Broncos. Now that we've had the opportunity to see him run those routes live in person, what are your overall impressions of him?
Well, as a former wide receiver, the first word that would come to mind for me watching him run routes as a rookie would be uncommon. You just don't see guys that come out of college football and really have at least it appears, a really good understanding of getting into and out of his breaks and being able to be creative and set up routes and to make routes and the release points look the same no matter what route you're running. He seems to be, really far along in that regard. And I think, I'm anxious to see how he acclimates himself to the Broncos offense. And I'll tell you this, Alexis, I'm even more interested to see how Pat Shurmur, in his first year as the offensive coordinator, fits all of these young dudes into this offense, right? I think he will be affected more with no OTAs, with no mini camps. He didn't get a chance to work with these young guys. He didn't get a chance to see what they look like in practice, and you can develop a real sort of understanding of what this guy can do. What's he best at, and how can I help him become a better player, and what do I need to call to get him involved in a game plan? So that's going to be done for Pat, and then you couple that with no preseason games. That's going to be done with Pat Shurmur and his guys on the fly, really starting in Tennessee.
The first year in Vic Fangio's defense, I feel like everyone was still trying to learn it, and the safeties were trying to drive traffic a little bit. But this year 2 with Kareem Jackson and Justin Simmons, what do you think we can expect from that dynamic duo?
Well, I think it's one of the best tandems in the league, right? Kareem Jackson is a guy that multi-talented, started out at corner, so he's got that skill set. It's unusual. It's happened before, but it's not typical where a corner can go to safety and really be a very good player. Rod Woodson comes to mind, and a couple of other guys as well, Charles Woodson too. But what I like about Kareem, he's a very smart player, and he's tough as nails. I mean, he's not the biggest guy in the world, but he'll come up. We saw evidence of that last year, especially in the Houston game and other games too. He'll come up and lay the wood to you. You need that from your safeties. And I've always been a big Justin Simmons fan. I think very cerebral, very smart, extremely athletic, not going to be in the wrong spot defensively. That's what you want from your safeties. Your safeties have to get people lined up. And then when the offense does something different with motion or different personnel group, they've got to make sure that they identify that and communicate with the back end of that defense. And so those two guys, veteran guys, I think will be fine. I think the question, and it's an obvious one about the Broncos secondary, will be at corner. I mean, can Bryce Callahan stay healthy? You like A.J. Boye, and then one of those young dudes, aside from those two, is going to have to step up and be a player.
Dave, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. Well, don't go anywhere. Coming up after the break, we've had the players mic'd throughout training camp so far. We'll share some of their best sound bites coming up in just a bit. Thanks for sticking with us for this final segment of 4 quarters with the Denver Broncos. There's no doubt it has been much quieter out here at the UC Health Training Center without fans filling the berm this training camp. However, there have been a handful of players who have taken it upon themselves to try to recreate the energy generally created by fans. Throughout the first couple of weeks of camp, we've wired the most vocal Broncos players to capture some of their spirited conversations and even some trash talk.
Sorry, the rest of Broncos country is my daughter. I had to say hi. Hi. Yeah. On the fast, if you don't want nothing on camera, don't say nothing crazy, beat. Try to go this way and this way. Cause if you're running and dude put his arm out, you're going boom, boom. Versus trying to like push it to the side, you know what I mean? Hey, Broncos on 3, 1, 2, 3. Nobody listen. Go, Joseph. Bryce. Jarrell. Hey, key in on the snap count, key in the ball. Let's be locked in, all right? I'm taking it. That's another one. KJ, that's another one. They didn't even block me. Ow! Yeah, we go!
Young boy ain't got no feet work. This ain't college, you gotta get 2 in.
I didn't really say too much crazy stuff. I tried not to, at least. Day 10, little work in, but gotta keep the ground going. It was fun.
This program has ended. This show is over.
That's all the time we have, but for more from Broncos Camp 2020, be sure to tune in to Training Camp Live at 9:15 each morning, the Broncos practice. The Hall of Famer Steve Atwater is joined by a special guest each day to talk you through practice. You can also catch Training Camp tonight at 6:30 on KTVD Channel 20 this week for a deep dive after each practice. And you can also check out DenverBroncos.com and the Broncos YouTube channel for the latest content out of the UC Health Training Center. Thank you so much for watching this edition of 4 Quarters with the Denver Broncos.